Heyo! Welcome to another Team S&G deck profile. Now, we've talked about the Cyber Dragons that were played at the Reading Regionals, and we've talked about the Gren Maju Control that was played at the Regionals by Matt Eels and Chris Chulio. Today, we're going to talk about what I played at the Regionals. And what I played at the Regionals was Ancient Warriors. It's a really new deck. A lot of people sort of have this misconception that it can only go second. It does have capabilities going first, you just sort of have to prepare for it and side for it. And I'll talk about how we do that. I'll talk about how we do that in this deck profile. We're also going to be starting a new format with this video. From now on, deck profiles won't contain combo videos. The combo videos will be a separate video, which will be linked at the end of the deck profile and down in the description below. Combo videos, much like deck profile videos, will come out once a week, so if the deck profile comes out, the next week, the combo video for it will be coming out. As I say, misconceptions about this deck, it can only go second. It can go first. It's not as good at it, but it can do it. The deck has so much searchability that you're not too concerned about Ash Blossom. Droll and Lockbird can be a bit of a difficult thing for this deck to play through. However, a lot of the times people are drolling you, chances are you've already managed to fix your hand anyway. That one search often is all you require. So with that being said, the deck did quite well at the regionals. I went 3-4. It was better than I expected, especially seeing as a lot of the support for this deck is yet to come out. The initial setup was the initial cards coming out of Ignition Assault were really quite good. However, the deck's ability to play on your opponent's turn sort of comes in Eternity Code and is even better set up in the newest set that's just starting to get reveals in Japan, which is Rise of the Duelist. So this deck does have the capability to go first, and it gets better. It will get better as time goes on. It's a matter of how you decide to build the deck that will change, and I will be updating this deck when those two sets both come out, because I really love this deck. I think it's really fun, and it's got a really interesting playstyle. And with that, let's get into it. Alright, so starting out with the monsters, we're going to start out by talking about the two most important monsters. The first is Ancient Warriors Masterful Sun Mo. Now, what his effects basically are is that he cannot be targeted for attack if you control another Ancient Warrior on the field, and you can send a card from your side of the field or your hand to the grave to search an Ancient Warriors monster from your deck. He also has a third effect, which is that if an Ancient Warrior monster activates its effect while he's on the field, you can send a card from the field back to the hand. So it's a targeting effect, which is unfortunate, but he basically allows you to start breaking your opponent's board by using other monsters' effects to trigger his effect, and so on and so forth. So he can be quite devastating thing for your opponent to have to deal with. And seeing as he's protected from battle when you control another Ancient Warrior, that can be really powerful. Now, the card that makes him even better is Ancient Warriors Virtuous Liu Xuan. Virtuous Liu Xuan is the best card for this deck currently because of the very simple fact that it has, again, 3 effects. If this card is on the field, if you control another Ancient Warrior, your opponent cannot target this card for attacks. So, when combined with Sun Mo, you can just leave the two of them on the field, and unless your opponent has a way of getting rid of them by spot removal, then your opponent just can't attack at all. Which can be really valuable, and it can put your opponents in sort of a tight situation, because they have to deal with one or two of them. And they have to find a way to get rid of them by card effects. It has 2 other effects. The first effect is if your opponent controls more monsters than you, you can send a card from your field or hand to the graveyard to special summon an Ancient Warrior from the deck. So again, this is why this deck has sort of got this stigma of it must go second, because some of the best effects require your opponents to have established themselves. But, as I say, this deck can go first, and I will show you how when we get to the side deck portion of the deck, but I'll also show you how in the combo tutorial video, link in the description below. Now, this card gives us the best ability to play on our opponent's turn currently, and that is because if an Ancient Warrior monster is involved in an attack, upon attack declaration, draw a card. This card, seeing as it's protected from battle, will automatically trigger its effect when your opponent declares an attack, and then you can break your opponent's board using secondary effects from cards such as some Maju and some of the other Ancient Warriors that we're going to be talking about in a second, whose effects can go off when an Ancient Warrior monster activates its effect. So, he gives you the ability to play on your opponent's turn as well. Now, the next card is yet another one of our searchers, and that is Ancient Warriors Graceful YuGiOh. Graceful YuGiOh searches your spell and traps, but you need to send a spell or trap from your side of the field to the graveyard to activate this effect. He doesn't have a battle protection effect like Masterful Sun Maju and Liu Xuan, but he also does have a secondary effect, which is you could target a face-up card on your opponent's side of the field and negate its effects. So that can be a spell or a trap, or that can be a monster. So this can be really useful if your opponent's got certain effects that you're worried about having to deal with. However, it does sort of fall down again because, again, it requires targeting. So it can be a bit of a problem, but at the same time, it can be really useful if your opponent has established on a board and there's a certain card that you just have to negate. And so he can be quite valuable in that sense. Next is probably one of my favorite cards in the archetype, Ancient Warriors YuGiOh Guanyun. Now, YuGiOh Guanyun, again, is one of the cards that has given this archetype a stigma for being a going second deck. If you control no monsters and your opponent does, you can special summon this from your hand. Boom! Again, requiring your opponent to have set something up. If your opponent controls more monsters than you while this is on the field, you can pick target and destroy one of those monsters. So, again, requiring setup. This is why this deck has got this stigma that it has to go second. It's cards like this and cards like Liu Xuan, which require your opponents to have set themselves up. And in fairness, that stigma is fully warranted. This deck can go second, and it is very good going second. But it can also go first. Also, YuGiOh Guanyun is the only card your opponent can target for card effects, with card effects, so long as it remains on the field. Now, there's another big boss monster, and that is Ancient Warriors Valiants Yongdae. Now, this card can be critical to going first, which is if you manage to set up a board with Masterful Sun Maju and Liu Xuan, you can use this card's first effect to special summon itself. What this card does is if you control two Ancient Warriors with different attributes, you can special summon this card from your hand. This card also gains 300 attack for each monster your opponent controls. So, why is this good going first? Well, because if you, as I say, you set up the lock with Liu Xuan and Sun Maju, and then you special summon this becomes the only thing your opponent can target. And if your opponent overextends and builds a big board, this can get really, really big. And so because of that, this card can sort of allow you to go first because it becomes this big beater that your opponent has to worry about. It already starts out as 2700, and every monster your opponent puts on the board, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And when combined with one of the spell and traps from Ancient Warriors, it can become truly massive. Now this card does have another effect, which is if your opponent controls more monsters than you, you can activate this card's effect in the main phase, and you can then attack twice with this card on monsters. So, he can get really big, he can attack multiple times, and he can special summon himself so long as you have two different attributed Ancient Warrior monsters on the field, which is really easy with Zhougong, Sun Maju, and the next card we're going to talk about being Water, and with YuGiOh Guanyun and Liu Xuan being Wind. So, this deck, no trouble getting two different attributes on the field. The final Ancient Warrior that we run is one copy of Ancient Warriors Eccentric Li Jing. Li Jing is sort of your recursion. I really didn't use him that much, but he's also your back row removal. So, what he does is you can send a card from your hand or field to add back an Ancient Warrior spell or trap from the graveyard. That's fine. It recurs card. Don't really need it though. The secondary effect he has is if another Ancient Warrior activates his effect, you can target and destroy one spell or trap card on your opponent's side of the field. So again, back row removal. This deck doesn't really need a whole ton of back row removal. It can play through a lot of negations and a lot of traps, so it's not really a massive concern. Sometimes it does come up, but for the most part, I didn't see it at all at the Reading Regionals, and yeah, I'm not really too concerned about running him. I kind of feel like when new support comes out, chances are he's going to be one of the first Ancient Warrior cards that I take out of the deck. So, that did it for the Ancient Warrior lineup. The next thing is obviously the hand traps. For this current build, we're running 3 Ash Blossom because it's one of the most versatile hand traps there is currently in the game. And stopping a key search can often completely change the tide of the game. Now, because this deck does have such good ability of going second, we also are running 3 copies of Gamma Seal. Being able to tribute off the big boss monster your opponent's built, and being able to use something like Summao to bounce this back to your hand so you can use it again later can be really good. This card came in clutch several times, but realistically, the one time that I really depended on it, I managed to use it, but my opponent managed to negate my way of getting rid of it, and so I ended up in trouble because I just couldn't get over it, which was a bit unfortunate. And to hear more about how the rounds went, check out the link below. We will be doing a Reading Regionals recap, which will have a special treat of some Ignition Assault pack opening alongside of it. So, check out the link below for that. So yeah, at the end of the day, that does it for the monsters. Now onto the spells. The first spell we run is the main Searcher spell for the Ancient Warrior archetype, and that is Ancient Warrior Saga 3 Visits. Now this card is so good for this deck. When it's activated, it does nothing. But when you normal summon or special summon an Ancient Warrior monster, this card will trigger to let you search an Ancient Warrior monster from the deck to the hand. Then, if this card leaves the field and it gets sent to the grave, you can special summon an Ancient Warrior from your hand. So what you typically will do is you'll activate this and you'll normal summon something like Summao, and then you use Summao's effect to send this to grave, allowing you to search, and that means you'll have gotten 2 searches off of 1 summon. And this then being sent to grave means you get to special summon something from the hand, which means you get to continue establishing a board. So this can be really good for this deck. The other thing is, if you don't send this and you leave it on the field, 2 turns later it will be sent to the grave regardless of what you want, because it will get sent there on the your second standby phase after its activation. So that effect honestly never really came up for me, because I was more often than not sending it pretty much the turn I was activating it. While I could have gotten an additional summon off of it, or search off of it if I kept it around, more often than not it just wasn't worth it. It was more likely I was pushing for game, so I was sending this so I could special summon and swarm the board a bit more. The next Ancient Warrior spell card, and the only other Ancient Warrior spell card I'm running currently, because it's the only other one, is Ancient Warrior Saga Sun Liu Alliance. Now the Sun Liu Alliance is really good, because of the simple fact, if the Ancient Warrior monster activates its effect while this card's on the field, all Ancient Warriors gain 300 attack for each Ancient Warrior on the field. So if you sort of build a board with, say, 3, say Summao, Liu Xuan, and Yongdae on the board, and you activate this, and you manage to activate one of their effects, say you attack, and Liu Xuan's effect goes off, every single one of them will gain 900 attack, meaning that you've ended up building a much bigger board for your opponent to deal with. This also lets you play on your opponent's turn a little bit by the fact if your opponent was to special summon a monster, you can activate the same effect, and have your monsters all gain 300 attack for each Ancient Warrior you control on your side of the field. You can get your monsters to be really big, but it also has another effect, which is really critical, which is, if you control 2 different attributes in your Ancient Warriors, this card will let you blanket negate an attribute on your opponent's side of the field for the rest of the turn. So every turn you can activate this effect, and you can negate everything on your opponent's side of the field. Say your opponent's playing a mono attribute deck, something like Mech Knight, which is all light, you can just declare light, and that does it. Your opponent can't activate anything for the rest of the turn, meaning you can just play unhindered. This does require a little bit of setup because you have to have 2 different attributes, but as I've said, that's really not a difficult thing for this deck to do. Now onto the non-Ancient Warrior spells that really are Ancient Warrior spells. The first is Fire Formation Tenki. Now, as everyone's going to go, it's a Fire Fist card. It is a Fire Fist card. But it lets you search out any Beast Warrior, and it's a continuous spell. You can use it as fodder for your activation of your monster's effect. So that's quite good for this deck, obviously. And the other Fire Formation that we run is 3 copies of Fire Formation Tenzu. This just gives you an additional summon, which can be really critical of this deck because, as I've said, you kind of need to have 2 different attributes. A lot of your powerhouse plays to go off, so having that additional normal summon can be critical. However, at the end of the day, this isn't a mandatory type of card for you to have because of the simple fact you can use Ancient Warrior Saga 3 visits, send that to the grave, and that gives you an additional summon as well. So this just lets you extend further, and that can be really critical though. And it can definitely give you an advantage in the long run. Now, we run a going second card, which is Mind Control. It's a really good going second card. The problem is, because this deck doesn't really utilize its extra deck that much, a lot of the times you find yourself stealing the card from your opponent and not really having a way of getting it off the field. So in future iterations of this deck, chances are this is one of the cards that's on the chopping block for me. And that's because I will likely take this out to replace it with maybe one of the future Ancient Warrior spell cards, or maybe a couple Ancient Warrior monsters that are coming out in the next few sets. But currently this did fine. I think I used it once during the entire tournament, and I ended up in the situation, as I stated, where I took the monster and really just had no way of getting rid of it, which can be unfortunate. But it's an okay going second card. It can definitely help you with disrupting your opponent's board or forcing out a negate, but more often than not, I found that I was sort of had this in hand and was dreading using it a little bit, because getting into the extra deck is not something this deck does very well, and not something this deck even requires. Now, we do run some draw spells, because a lot of our monsters, they want to send stuff from the hand. The first draw spell we run, 3 copies of Pot of Desires. This is probably everyone knows what it does, banish 10, draw 2. This is probably a pretty staple card in most builds of this sort of deck. The other thing is, because we run so many 3-ofs, we're not too concerned that we're going to banish off everything. In future, I might replace this with something else, but the only thing I can think of replacing this with is extra copies of Pot of Extravagance, which, that might be the way of going in the future, but currently, I run 3 Pot of Desires. I also run 1 Pot of Extravagance, and I only run 1 because I don't have the money to buy another couple copies. Maybe later, if they get reprinted, or when they get reprinted, and they're a bit cheaper, I might replace the Desires with 3 Extravagance, and then just take the 4th draw card out, because more often than not, this deck searches fine, so there's no need to actually be drawing into too much. However, that being said, I did use my draw spells quite consistently throughout the tournament, and sometimes it came in handy, and other times, luck of the draw, right? The final spell card we run is one of, and that is Gehrke. Free board wipe, forces negates, and puts you in a situation where if your opponent doesn't stop it, you're fine. If your opponent does stop it, you're still fine. So, this can be just a very useful card to bait out those negates, and it can be a very useful card to put you in a situation where you can just push for game easily if they don't negate it. And that does it for the spells. Now, onto the traps. As with many of my decks, don't run many traps. I actually only run 1. The only trap I run is Ancient Warriors Saga, Defense of Changban. This is the ultimate going first card for this deck. What this does is you can activate this and during your opponent's main phase. You can activate it whenever, but if you activate it during your opponent's main phase, when they're about to go into the battle phase, at the start of the battle phase, you send this card from the field to the grave, and your opponent cannot target any of your Ancient Warrior monsters for attack. So, this can lock your opponent out of attacking, and that can waste their battle phase. It's basically a threatening roar for all Ancient Warrior monsters. Now, what it also does is when it is in the grave, if an opponent's monster declares an attack, you can banish this card to special summon an Ancient Warrior from the deck. This is the effect that really allows you to push your opponent's buttons going first. A lot of the times I found myself putting this card in the grave just to have it sit there on my turn, and my opponent thought nothing of it. And then when my opponent went to declare an attack, I would banish this, and I would special summon from the deck Valiants Yongdae, or I would special summon from the deck Leo Xuan to force the lock with Masterful Sun Mo, or I would special from the deck Masterful Sun Mo to force the lock with Leo Xuan, so that my opponent couldn't attack. And so this card really adds versatility, and its whole banish to special summon effect can totally change the tide if you've had to go first and aren't prepared to do so. So, that does it for the main deck. Let's get on to the extra deck. Now, most of this extra deck, as I stated earlier, is unimportant. Actually, this entire extra deck is unimportant. There are 15 cards here, and I think I saw 2 throughout the entire tournament, and I actually didn't use any of them, really. The first one can be kind of a useful card to have, and that's why I do have it, which is Brotherhood of the Fire Fist Tiger King. When it's special summoned, you search out a fire formation, meaning you can search out your Tenki or your Tenzu, whichever you need. And if you detach an Xyz material, you can negate all monsters' effects on the field except for Beast Warriors, which, seeing as everything you control will be Beast Warrior likely, that's fine. But for the most part, as I say, I just didn't go into the extra deck, so I didn't even see him at all during the tournament. Next card, another rank 4, Abyss Dweller. Everyone knows what it does, turns off graveyard play. I had this because I was expecting things like Orcus to still be running around, people trying to make it work. I was kind of expecting things like Infernoid maybe. So yeah, I was expecting Orcus and Infernoid, and I was expecting a few other decks that might play out of the graveyard, like Luna Light for instance, stuff like that. So Abyss Dweller was in here for that, however, again, it came up once, and it really didn't do very much for me, so yeah. I then run Steel Swarm Roach, negate summon, that's basically it. I thought this might be useful if I have to go first, I can negate my opponent's summon of some big monster that might be concerning, or that maybe costs a lot of resources, something like Boral Sword or Boral Load, just negate the summon, send it to the grave. But I never went into it, not once. So, again, as I say, this extra deck is really, it's a rank 4 toolbox, but I didn't go into it, and frankly, it wasn't all that necessary. Baguska could be useful going first. You could really use this as a guideline of what you could use, but you don't have to. Light Dragon Adagnister, spot removal, detach 1, pop a card, non-targeting removal. Could be quite useful. Again, never saw it. Number 37, Hope Woven Dragon Spider Shark. This is in here for interesting push for game type ability. You can detach a material from it to have all your opponent's monsters lose 1,000 attack. And when it's destroyed by battle and sent to the grave, you can recur one of your water monsters. So you can recur one of your Sun Ma-Os, or you can recur YuGiOh. So again, though, didn't really use it. Evil Swarm Exciton Knight, This came up once. Board wipe. Number 39, Utopia, along with his big brother, number S39, Utopia the Lightning. This was more my answer for Avermax, and that was it. Other than that, I wouldn't have run it. And then I also run number 11, Big Eye, because Valiants Yongdae and Loyal Guanyun are both level 7, so going into Big Eyes, taking your opponent's stuff, could be good. Didn't see him once. Then I ran a Nightmare package, which was more than anything here so that I could utilize things I took with Mind Control. But more often than not, what I had on the field when I activated Mind Control, I didn't really want to get rid of, so I didn't really go into these. I think I might have gone into Phoenix once, but that was it. And then I also run one Link 4, and that's Borrowload Dragon. I thought if I have to go first and I can build a board of 4 monsters, which isn't easy, all that easy for this deck to do, I could at least sort of go into this to give me some big monster my opponent has to worry about. But more often than not, if I got 4 monsters on the field, I'd already managed to build the lock with Liu Xuan and some Maju, and I probably had Loyal Guanyun on the field and Valiant Yongdae, and so like at that point it really wasn't necessary to go into Borrowlord. I was better off just leaving the field as it was. So, yeah. This deck really does not require its extra deck. And so if you learned anything from listening to this was, use this as a guideline for the extra deck, but it's not important. Now in the future, when we get the Link monster in Rise of the Duelist, the extra deck becomes a little bit more important. The only thing about it is it will allow you to go first, which is the benefit that the new Link monster will give them. Okay, so we've talked about the main deck and we talked about the extra deck. Let's talk about the side deck, because the side deck is what lets this deck go first. First thing in this side deck, though, is just blatant spot removal. And that is 2 copies of Twin Twisters. Everyone knows what it does. Spot removal for back row. Now, I was expecting Orcust, as I stated. I was also expecting Cyber Dragon, because I knew Chris Chulio was going to be playing it, and I knew there was probably a couple other people that were going to be thinking about it. So I ran 3 copies of System Down. Now, System Down is great. Pay 1,000 life points, banish machine monsters in your opponent's graveyard and that your opponent controls. And so this would basically shut down Orcust, and it would shut down your Cyber Dragon matchups. Sided it in a couple times, never saw it once. So it's sort of luck of the draw, but I think that it's a really good card, especially right now with some of these powerhouse archetypes being out there that are machine-based. Onto the traps, we have 3 copies of Imperial Ironwall. As I say, I was expecting Orcust to be running around, I was expecting things like Infernoid, some of these rogue decks to come out of the woodwork after the big ban list. So I thought, let's try and turn off the graveyard banishments, because I only have 1 card in my deck that really needs to banish itself, and frankly, it's not my go-to card. But going first it would be, but more often than not, I'm not going to be going first, I'm going to be going second, I'm going to be pushing to go second. So this is sort of a try and stop the opponent from doing something. And it did come up a couple times. Now, I was expecting Altergeist to be running around really heavily to sort of counter the Spiral matchup, and so I played 3 copies of Royal Decree. And I did come against Orcust and Altergeist in the first round, and Royal Decree did steal me Game 2. And that was clutch. Now, the cards to let us go first. 2 copies of Crackdown. This is a clutch card for us. It was really good. It came in handy. Taking an opponent's monster and just keeping it is so much better than Mind Control, where you take it and have to give it back or find a way to get rid of it. So, more often than not, this came in clutch for us. Being able to take a big boss monster off our opponent's side of the field. This helped me out when I did side it in. And, yeah. It's a good card to have. And the final card in the side deck is 2 more copies of Defensive Changban. This would often get sided in when I knew my opponent was playing a going second deck, or my opponent noticed that I was playing a going second deck, and so they would let me go first. And I kind of, more often than not, realized my opponent was going to try and force me to go first, so in game 2, if I'd won game 1, I was siding this in, and I was siding things like mind control out. And so that's the one thing this deck really can do, is it does allow you to side for going first. And this is definitely one of the best going first cards that this deck has access to. So, at the end of the day, I really like the deck. It can do a lot of interesting stuff. It can go second, and it can go first. It is primarily a going second deck. As you can see, I built it to go second, with only running one Changban. I think if you want to build this deck to go first, you would have to think about running all 3 copies. Now, cards like Sun Mao and Liu Xuan do allow you to go first if you can get them both on the field, and Sun Mao's secondary effect of bouncing things back to the hand, when Liu Xuan's first effect of being able to draw a card when your opponent declares an attack on an Ancient Warrior monster, can be really useful. The deck has so much searchability, with Shugong, Sun Mao, and 3 visits. The deck does have a lot of searchability, meaning that you can kind of play out of a bad hand more often than not. Now, also with cards like Tenki, giving you additional searchability from outside the archetype can be really valuable too. Now, cards like Guanyun and Valiants Yongdae, enabling your ability to push for game when your opponent has an established board, can also make this deck really powerful. It can be really fun, though, if you are going first, to end up with Masterful Sun Mao and Liu Xuan on the field, and Defensive Changban in the grave. If your opponent then declares an attack, which they can't declare one on these 2, so you would require a 3rd monster on the field, maybe something like Shugong. When your opponent does eventually declare an attack, you can then bring out Valiants Yongdae, and that will give your opponent hesitation. Now, Sun Liu Alliance is extremely useful for going first or going second. Going first, it gives your monsters a massive power boost the minute your opponent starts to combo off. Going second, it gives your monsters a massive power boost once you start to combo off. So, this deck can help easily push for the OTK, and it is really quite good right now. However, with future sets coming out, bringing things like Xiang Kong, I think it is, in Eternity Code, which has a quick effect, this deck will be even better at being able to go first. While it still will be primarily a going second deck, it will have better going first boards. I think the deck has a lot of potential, and I was quite impressed with how well I did at the tournament. So 3 and 4 is not all that bad, considering the fact it was a new deck. A lot of people didn't know what to do with it, how to stop it. I was still figuring out how to play it, and I was really impressed with its performance, and I will be continuing to grow and build this deck as new support comes out. Ratios will be changing. You know, cards like Shugong might be going down to 2. Cards like Li Jing are probably not going to be in the deck the next time I profile it. You know, Sun Liu Alliance being so easily searchable might be dropping down to 1. So yeah, at the end of the day, the deck is still going through its growing pains, and it's got the growing pains that a lot of decks... It does have the growing pains that a lot of decks have with their first wave of support. That being said, I was really happy with it. Let me know what you guys thought about it in the comment section below. Keep your eye out for the combo tutorial coming up soon. And if you're watching this later, the combo tutorial is linked in the description below. We'll be doing an overall rating recap where I talk about how the deck did, round by round, and I have some packs which I will be opening on camera with that recap. And until, with all that being said, all I can say now is I will see you guys at the next profile.